Have you ever heard a story so powerful, so daring, that it feels almost unbelievable it isn't found in most Bibles today? A story where the fate of an entire nation hung in the balance, and salvation came not through a mighty king, nor through a vast army, but through the courage of one widow who refused to surrender her faith. This is the story of Judith. She was not a warrior. She did not command soldiers or hold political power. Yet in a time of terror and despair, she rose from the shadows to face down the most feared general of her age. With nothing but her unshakable trust in God, her wisdom, and her fearless resolve, she changed the course of history. And here's the mystery. Her story is honored in some Christian traditions, but completely missing in many others. Why? Why would a tale of such courage, faith, and divine deliverance be set aside, almost forgotten, while other stories were preserved? Was it too unsettling? Too controversial? Or perhaps too challenging for the world to accept the idea that God could use a woman, alone, widowed, and overlooked by society, to bring down the strongest empire of her time? The story of Judith is not a fairy tale. It is raw, it is real, and at moments it is shockingly brutal. It is a story that forces us to confront what faith looks like when everything seems lost, and it challenges us to ask, what does courage truly mean? In this video, we're going to journey into the dramatic, forgotten Book of Judith. We'll set the stage of a world crushed beneath the iron grip of Assyria. We'll walk with the terrified people of Israel as they teeter on the edge of destruction. And then we'll see how one woman stepped forward with a plan so daring, so unthinkable, that it would change everything. So are you ready? Let's step into the world of Judith, where faith and fear collide, and where the most unlikely of heroes rises to meet the darkest of nights. The story of Judith begins not in Israel, but in the vast halls of the Assyrian Empire. This was no ordinary kingdom. Under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar, Assyria sought not just to control land, but to demand absolute submission from every people and nation. The Assyrian armies were like an unstoppable storm, powerful, ruthless, and led by one of the most feared generals in history, Holofernes. Holofernes was more than a soldier. He was the king's right hand, a commander whose very name brought terror. City after city fell before him. Nations that resisted were crushed without mercy. His soldiers moved like a tidal wave, consuming everything in their path. By the time his army approached Israel, the people were already paralyzed with fear. Israel, a small and vulnerable nation, had no chance to resist. Their cities were undefended. Their leaders were shaken. Their faith was slipping into doubt. The situation seemed hopeless. But in the small town of Bethulia, perched at the edge of invasion, lived a widow named Judith. At first glance, she would not have seemed like the answer to Israel's crisis. She was a woman with no husband, no political position, and no military strength. And yet, it is precisely here, in the quiet and unexpected places, that God often chooses to reveal his power. Judith was different. She was not only beautiful, but wise, deeply faithful, and fiercely courageous. Her strength was not found in weapons, but in prayer, humility, and her unshakable trust in the Lord. While the men around her trembled, Judith fasted, clothed herself in sackcloth, and cried out to God, not for her own safety, but for the deliverance of her people. When the elders of Bethulia began to lose heart, some even suggesting that God might have abandoned them, Judith could not remain silent. She confronted them boldly. Who are you to put the Lord to the test? Do not limit his power to our expectations. He has delivered us before, and he will deliver us again, if only we trust him. Her words pierced through the fear that had paralyzed the leaders. Here was a woman unafraid to remind them of the truth, that God's strength does not depend on armies, but on faith. But Judith did not only speak. She acted. She revealed a plan that stunned her people. She would go alone into the Assyrian camp. She would face Holofernes herself. It was a plan filled with unimaginable risk. One wrong move, and she would be captured, tortured, and killed. But Judith's resolve was unshakable. She believed that God had placed this mission on her heart, and that he would deliver Israel through her hand. So Judith prepared herself, not with weapons, but with prayer, strategy, and a transformation that would become her weapon. She set aside the garments of mourning, washed, anointed her skin with fragrant oils, and dressed in her most beautiful clothing. She adorned herself with jewelry, arranged her hair, and became a vision of elegance and grace. This was not vanity. It was purpose. Judith understood the arrogance and desire of men like Holofernes. She knew her beauty would become a tool, a distraction, that God could use for Israel's deliverance. That night, Judith and her maid left the safety of Bethulia and walked straight into the jaws of danger. When the Assyrian guard saw her, they were stunned by her radiance. They brought her before their general, Holofernes. And here begins one of the most gripping scenes in all of ancient scripture. Holofernes, the man who terrified nations, was disarmed not by a sword, but by the presence of a widow who appeared to surrender herself. Judith spoke with humility, offering to serve him and claiming she could give him knowledge to help him conquer Israel. She mixed truth with careful deception, weaving her words in a way that fed Holofernes' pride. Holofernes, blinded by arrogance, believed her. He welcomed her into his camp, convinced she was the key to his final victory. For several days, Judith remained in the Assyrian camp, carefully gaining Holofernes' trust. She prayed each night, humbling herself before God, asking for strength, courage, and the right moment to act. Finally, the night came. Holofernes invited Judith to a lavish banquet. He drank heavily, his pride swelling, his senses dulled by wine. To him, Judith was nothing more than a prize to be claimed, a conquest beyond his battles. But Judith saw something very different. She saw God's appointed moment. As the feast ended, Holofernes collapsed into a drunken sleep. The once mighty general, feared across the world, now lay helpless before a widow from a small town in Israel. Judith stood over him, her heart steady. She prayed one final time for strength. Then she picked up Holofernes' own sword. With 2 decisive strokes, she severed his head from his body. The symbol of Assyrian power lay defeated, not by an army, not by a king, but by a woman who trusted in her God. Judith placed the head of Holofernes in a sack, and under the cover of night, she and her maid returned to Bethulia. When she revealed what she had done, the people erupted in cries of astonishment, joy, and worship. Their despair turned into unshakable faith. The next morning, chaos consumed the Assyrian camp. When the soldiers discovered their general's fate, fear spread like wildfire. The army that once seemed unstoppable scattered in confusion. Without their leader, they were powerless. Israel rose up with new courage, driving the enemy away in a stunning victory. And all of it was because one woman believed God could use her. Judith was no longer simply a widow. She became a living symbol of divine courage, a reminder to her people that God's power is not limited by human weakness. Through her, Israel saw that even in the darkest hour, deliverance can come from the most unexpected vessel. The story of Judith challenges us even today. It asks, where do we place our trust when everything seems impossible? Do we believe God can still work through the overlooked, the underestimated, and the ordinary? Judith's faith did not make her life easier. It placed her in the most dangerous situation imaginable. But it was precisely there, in her risk and her courage, that God's strength was revealed. Judith's act was not the end of her story. The woman who dared to walk into the enemy's camp returned not as a widow in mourning, but as a heroine whose name would echo through generations. The people of Israel celebrated, offering songs of praise and sacrifices of thanksgiving. Their fear had been replaced with awe. Their despair had been transformed into faith. But Judith herself did not seek glory. She never remarried, never pursued power or wealth. She lived the rest of her life in dignity and devotion to God, remembered by her people as a living testimony of what faith can accomplish. She remained independent, her life anchored not in status or recognition, but in her unwavering trust in the one who had guided her every step. And this is where the true power of her story lies. Judith reminds us that God's strength is made perfect not in the expected, but in the unexpected, not in the armies of kings, but in the courage of those the world might overlook. Through Judith, we see that the God of Israel delights in raising up the humble, confounding the proud, and delivering his people in ways no one could predict. Her story forces us to ask deep and personal questions. What does courage look like in our own lives? Where do we place our trust when everything feels impossible? Are we willing, like Judith, to step forward even when the world says we are too small, too weak, or too unqualified? Judith's faith did not remove her fear. It gave her the strength to act in the midst of it. Her bravery did not come from confidence in herself, but from confidence in her God. And that is a lesson that resonates across centuries. When we dare to trust God fully, He can use us in ways that defy human logic. The Book of Judith is more than an ancient story. It is a call to live with faith that refuses to be shaken, courage that refuses to back down, and hope that refuses to die even in the darkest of nights. So the next time you feel surrounded by impossible odds, remember Judith. Remember the widow who stood before an empire and walked away victorious. Remember that faith, even in the hands of one, can overcome fear in the hearts of many. And perhaps ask yourself this: if God could use Judith, could He not also use you?